Welcome back to our deep dive series, Decisive Days that shook the 2024 presidential election. In this video, we're going to talk about the internal and external pressures on President Joe Biden to leave the presidential campaign. In the days following the debate, the pressure on President Biden intensified. Several leading media organizations, including The Economist, The New Yorker, and The New York Times, weighed in saying that Biden should leave the race. Pressure on Biden intensified from both internal and external sources. The mindset of Democrats might best be summed up with this classic Houston, line from Apollo 13.
Again, Houston, we have a problem.
And the morning after, Joe Scarborough invoked another master quote from the movie.
Failure's just not an option. In 2024, failure is not an option. So who I love, who I respect, who I revere for their work and their duty to service over their lifetime really is not relevant.
The pressure on President Biden grew to a crescendo. Prominent party members, including influential senators and representatives, began voicing their concerns more openly. There was a growing consensus that President Biden's performance during the debate was a clear indication that he might not be the best candidate to lead the party into the 2024 presidential election. Just 2 days after the debate, Rolling Stone reported the growing anxiety within the Democratic ranks. "We are so screwed," a senior Democratic state official from a key swing state vented to the magazine, reflecting the widespread fear that Biden's poor debate performance could doom the party's chances across the board. The Biden campaign had pushed for the CNN event, hoping for a performance that would not only surpass Trump, but also shift the momentum in a presidential race that had remained nerve-wrackingly close in the polls for months. However, the debate only exacerbated concerns as Biden was ahead of Trump in the popular vote, but behind in critical swing states, making a loss likely. Polling in swing states didn't look good for Biden before the debate, and after the debate, the polls looked even worse. According to The Economist, Trump had a 3 in 4 chance of winning the presidency. The debate fallout from political pundits, the chattering class, and editorial boards has been severe. The donor class publicly expressed its frustration with Biden. Abigail Disney, the heir to the Disney family fortune and major party donor, announced she would withhold Democratic donations unless Biden dropped out of the race. "This is realism, not disrespect," Disney told CNBC, adding, "If Biden does not step down, the Democrats will lose. Of that I am absolutely certain. The consequences for the loss will be genuinely dire." And George Clooney joined the chorus for Biden to withdraw. Public rebuke was initially less forthright from members of Congress, who mostly have privately griped about Biden's dire re-election prospects, but have not done so publicly. The first to break the veil of silence was Texas Democratic Representative Lloyd Doggett, who called on Biden to withdraw from the presidential race. He said not only because of Biden's abysmal debate performance, which highlights his age, a nagging concern among the electorate, but because he is dangerously lagging in the polls. Immediately after the debate, there were a number of Democratic Congress members who privately worried that President Biden couldn't make the case for re-election to the American public. They stayed mum. But then, a growing number of them began going public with their concerns. They worry that President Biden might not just lose the presidency, but that his loss might take down any Democratic hopes for retaining the House and Senate as well. With every Democratic defection from Biden's re-election camp comes a position statement, too many to list here. This sample provides an overview. Bahava told the New York Times on Wednesday that Biden needs to shoulder the responsibility for keeping that seat, and part of that responsibility is to get out of this race. Before Biden stepped aside, Representative Moulton told WBUR that President Biden has done enormous service to our country, but now is the time for him to follow in one of our founding father, George Washington's footsteps, and step aside to let new leaders rise up and run against Donald Trump. Quigley told MSNBC that Biden's legacy is set and that we owe you the greatest debt of gratitude. He added that the only thing that you can do now is to cement that for all time and prevent utter catastrophe, is to step down and let someone else do this. Craig, a prominent moderate in the swing district in a critical swing state, said she does not believe that Biden can effectively campaign and win against Donald Trump, and that's why I respectfully call on President Biden to step aside as the Democratic nominee for a second term as president and allow for a new generation of leaders to step forward. Senators are generally more reserved about getting out in front of an issue. Initially, the Washington Post reported that Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, assembled a group of senators to ask Joe Biden to exit the presidential race. Soon after this meeting was reported on, Senator Warner called it off. The main theme here is that President Biden, while still an effective president, was about to lose a critical election. Several leading media organizations, including The Economist, The New Yorker, and The New York Times, have weighed in saying that Biden should leave the race. It also seemed increasingly likely that Biden's souring electoral prospects would drag down House Democrats with him. Democrats were terrified. The dilemma was that President Biden had received enough delegates in the primary election to secure the Democratic nomination, and he made it clear to anyone who asked that he wasn't going anywhere. Internally, President Biden's closest advisors were in turmoil. The president's inner circle, which included key figures like former Chief of Staff Ron Klain and senior advisor Mike Donilon, faced the daunting task of addressing the fallout. Behind closed doors, meetings were held to assess the damage and consider the next steps. And despite their loyalty to President Biden, even some of his most trusted aides began questioning the feasibility of continuing his campaign. And amid growing dissent, even though most high-profile Democrats remained mum, leaders began working behind the scenes for change. Democratic leaders like House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer held private discussions about the best course of action. Senator Schumer met with Biden in early July, with sources close to both men indicating that Schumer made the case for Biden to withdraw from the 2024 presidential race. Polling data post-debate showed Biden losing in swing states. Ms. Pelosi feared that a loss by Biden could cost her party its chance to win back the House, potentially leaving the nation vulnerable to an unchecked second Trump presidency. The New York Times reports that Ms. Pelosi conveyed those concerns in phone calls with President Biden, as well as alarmed colleagues seeking her guidance on how to proceed with an intransigent president. One Democratic ally shared that during an early July phone call with Mr. Biden, Ms. Pelosi told him that she had seen polling data suggesting that he could not win. The president pushed back, claiming he had polls that showed otherwise. Ms. Pelosi, never one to back down, challenged him directly. "Put Donilon on the phone," she told the president, referring to Mike Donilon, president's longtime aide. "Show me what polls." On July 8th, Biden sent a defiant letter to Democrats stating, "We had a Democratic nomination process and the voters have spoken clearly and decisively. I received over 14 million votes, 87% of the votes cast across the entire nominating process. I have nearly 3,900 delegates, making me the presumptive nominee of our party by a wide margin." President Biden continued, "This was a process open to anyone who wanted to run. Only 3 people chose to challenge me. The voters of the Democratic Party have voted. They've chosen me to be the nominee of the party." And if Biden weren't clear enough, he doubled down on his argument. Do we now just say this process didn't matter? That the voters don't have a say? I decline to do that. I feel a deep obligation to the faith and trust of the voters of the Democratic Party have placed in me to run this year. It was their decision to make, not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors, not any selected group of individuals, no matter how well-intentioned. The voters, and the voters alone, decide the nominee of the Democratic Party. And Biden concluded with a not-so-veiled threat, warning that he would take deep offense to anyone publicly opposing his candidacy. Any weakening of resolve or lack of clarity about the task ahead only helps Trump and hurts us. It is time to come together and move forward as a unified party and defeat Donald Trump. On July 10th, just 2 days after President Biden wrote this letter, Nancy Pelosi appeared on Morning Joe and subtly contradicted his decision. When asked if she was backing Biden's candidacy, she replied,
"Does he have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?"
As long as the president it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore, but he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to.
On July 11th, Biden's campaign began testing head-to-head matchups of Vice President Kamala Harris against former President Donald Trump, according to a source familiar with the strategy. However, Biden remained in denial about his prospects, even up to the last minute. On top of his dreadful debate performance, he contracted COVID-19. On July 19th, Biden announced he would be returning to the campaign trail following his COVID-19 recovery. Then on July 21st, President Biden called in his staff to announce that he was withdrawing from the race. He gave them less than a minute's notice before he notified the public. In his announcement on Twitter, President Biden wrote, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." 30 minutes later, President Biden wrote, "Today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be this nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." Of her important role in altering the electoral landscape, Pelosi mused, "My concern was about the campaign as we would go forward. I thought it was very important for us to win this election for the American people, for the children, but it was also important for his legacy. My disdain, or whatever the word might be, for the Republican nominee is well known, and I think it would have been a terrible thing for our country, and the priorities that we were successful with under Joe Biden would have been at risk." Pelosi's chess moves demonstrate how singularly adept she is at working the levers of power in Washington. In her recent book, The Art of Power, Pelosi writes that when confronted with a challenge, you must demonstrate a plan and you must act without hesitation. The minute you hesitate, your options are diminished. Nancy Pelosi acted. And while we don't know exactly what she told President Biden, it is clear to all observers that Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi was the one who persuaded President Biden to withdraw from the race. At the Democratic National Convention, participants wore the Godmother pins with Pelosi's face on them in recognition of her outsized role in shifting the campaign's trajectory. In the next episode, we'll dive into the whirlwind campaign that Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz have embarked on to rescue the Democratic Party from an almost certain defeat in November. Thank you for joining me in this series, Decisive Days that shook the 2024 presidential election. For other videos in this series, you can look over here. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. I'd love to see your comments, and I will see you in the next video.